the notification right now, and
All
you
right,
are
there
going
it
to be
goes. Cool.
recorded.
I see it on my screen. Excellent. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give us a quick look into the agenda here. At least I will if my PowerPoint actually goes and moves forward. There we go. Excellent. So we're going to be looking at, right now we're going to jump in. This is the welcome and the overview. We're basically going to be jumping in as soon as I finish talking here. Joseph's going to give us the what's new in Power BI. I know he's really excited that he's had all of about 24 hours to prepare this with the build just dropping. So that's going to be an exciting thing to do. And then once Joseph's finished around 6:20 or so, we're going to hand it over to Luca, and Luca is going to lead his presentation until 7:20-ish or whenever he finishes up. The entire presentation will be, Yana did a great job last time of getting this recorded for us, and we've actually got it up. I throw it up on my YouTube page now, so you will be able to actually review it later on down the line as well. And on that note, I am going to throw this back to Joseph. So can you take control and share your screen right away, or I'll stop sharing mine. There we go. So can you grab it, Joseph, and take control?
Yeah, I'm doing that right now.
Fantastic. And I can see your screen. You are good to go.
Lovely. So, well, I guess welcome everybody from wherever you are in the world, whatever time of day it is. My name's Joseph Yates. I've started presenting the What's New in Power BI for the last year or so, for the last, I guess, 4 or 5 meetup groups, taking over from Yana. One thing Ken failed to mention in the introduction, which I thought was kind of cool, is Power BI turned 5. I don't know if it was today or this month, but it's been 5 years. This month, okay.
Next Friday. It hasn't happened yet. That's why I didn't say it.
Okay. I was a little, well, okay. Well, there we go. I was a little eager, but it's this month nevertheless. So 5 years is kind of crazy, just thinking back to when we started the meetup groups in 2016, I think. Ken, 2016 was the first time, was when I started coming out at any rate. And
yeah, I think you were there from the first or second one. It's hard to believe it's been that long.
Yeah. The rate of change of the product, and yeah, just how much it's changed is really it's really crazy, sort of reflecting and thinking back. So yeah, that got me even more excited than usual, even if I was a little early to that. Just before we get started, a little bit about me again. I'm Joseph. My website and blog is www.feathersanalytics.com, where I blog about all things Power BI, Power Query, Excel, a little bit of SQL Server, and R as well. And my passion is really helping make advanced analytics, some of the things I do in R, more accessible to users throughout an organization. And one of the ways I do that is by embedding R in Power BI. So try to write as much about that as possible. My other social media stuff is up there as well. You can find me on Twitter at Feathers Analytics and on LinkedIn as well. And as always, I'm really happy to connect and chat about all things data and geeky stuff with people. So with that, let's jump in. There we go. This is my website. So in the next few days, as Ken alluded to, I've only had sort of 24, 48 hours. So I've not had a chance to drop the What's New in Power BI for July. But I am going to get a blog up shortly, hopefully by this weekend or this weekend at any rate. That's going to review some of the things I talk about today and hopefully a little bit more as well. As always, every month, Power BI team drops a blog post that covers some of the new features. So this month, this came out a few days ago or yesterday on the 15th. They always break down the new features into reporting, analytics, visualizations, modeling, data prep, etc. So there were lots of great features this month. I was talking to Ken just when I signed on. Lots of pretty big features as well that I could probably spend all of 20 minutes going over just one of them. But the first one that I want to cover today is going to be some of the enhancements to the Q&A experience in Power BI. So Q&A is artificial intelligence visual and capability within Power BI. And it gives you the ability to ask a question of your data using just natural language, and it pops out the answer. So with this visual in the top left-hand corner, you can publish this, so a user can go in and say, you know, what is the maximum latitude? Let's try that. And then it just gives you the answer right away. We're at 50.14. So that's sort of the idea behind the natural language querying capability. But there are a few enhancements this month, and they were some field synonyms, some column synonyms. You can rename. You can actually create synonyms, renaming visual axis. There's now a different type of underline with some ambiguous terms, and there's an update to the pop-out experience as well. Let me just get here. Perfect. So the first place is field synonyms. So right now, this shows all of the 5 tables that I have in my data model. So you can find them over here in the fields pane list. And now we have the ability to toggle these on and off if we want to include these columns in the QA experience. So if I go into my yield, I'm going to use this to demo some of the new functionality in Power BI for this month a little bit later. I actually don't want this table or any of these field names or measures to be included in QA. Like, I don't want these to be sort of the basis of a result when my user asks a question. So I can just turn off that entire table, and now nothing in there is going to be returned when my users start asking questions of the data. I can do that at the table level or at the individual column level as well if I don't want any of these things included. I'm just going to do the entire table for now as well. One thing that I really like is I'm just going to drill into my detail table. If I go down to the bottom where it says time, so right now we can see 3 columns. We have the name of the actual column of the table in our data set, the terms that serve as synonyms to that column, or this is what you can type into that Q&A to return results based on this column name. And there's also some suggested terms as well. And a lot of these just come from Microsoft. They're synonyms that you'd find in like a thesaurus. So you can see like altitude is one of the columns in my data. We have height, loftiness, highness. So loftiness is probably not what I want, because altitude here, I'm talking about like meters above sea level. So I can just exit that. And now loftiness is not going to be a synonym for altitude in my data. The Q&A visual does look at terms. It prioritizes terms over suggested terms. So that's important to keep in mind, because we can also actually add suggested terms and allow them to be terms. So if we look at distance, actually, that's probably not a good example. Let's go down to time. And if you say interval or period, those are probably good synonyms. So I can add period. Now that's a new synonym for time. I can add interval. And now when my users type in period or interval, it brings back that time column of data. One of the new enhancements with QA that I think is really cool is if I go down here, and I'm going to use my time column again as an example. If I click on this visual, and I'm just going to rename this time title of my axes. And if I want that to display to something different, like I'm going to say time of run day, because that's really what the data is. So all I'm doing there is updating an axis title in my visual. If I go back into my field synonyms in Q&A, and I go back to detail, and I go back to time, we can see that time of run day is now become a suggested term. So this visual picks up that I've changed the name of that axis, of that column, somewhere else in the report, and now it's become a suggested term. So I can quickly just add that onto my list of synonyms, and we're good to go. So if you are in the habit of renaming columns for different visuals, this makes it super easy. You don't sort of have to type that into multiple places. It picks up on that, and you're ready to go. The next enhancement that I wanted to cover is the new type of underline in Q&A, the ambiguous term underline. So if I start typing in a question like, what is the maximum altitude by hour? You can see the altitude has this new orange underline. We've seen blue before with previous releases, and that's like, we understand that term, we know exactly what you're looking for. We've had the red underline, which is we have no idea what you're talking about, like either give us more information or try something different. Orange now, if I click on that, it gives some suggestions. Do you want the altitude from the detail table? Like, do you want the maximum detail altitude? Do you want altitude from the Azure map table in your data model? Or maybe you want the relative altitude column, even a different column altogether. The reason this is ambiguous is because altitude resides in a few different places within my data model. But if I say, okay, I want detail altitude, now we see the blue underlines, and we're showing the results for what is the maximum detail altitude, and we have a preview of the result. So now if I add that to my suggested questions and hit save, when I exit out of here, it's going to show up as one of my suggested questions in this visual. The final enhancement that I want to show to Q&A is the pop-out functionality of the Q&A button. So I've added a button to my report. So if I control-click that, I've synced that up with a Q&A. And right now, the experience when that pops out is really similar to the big Q&A visual, where you can do some of that setup as well. Before, this was more limited, and now the two look exactly the same, as we can see when this pops out. So if you don't want to use all the space on your report for Q&A visual, you can just have the button, this pane pops out, and then you're pretty much at an at-par experience. So those were the 4 big enhancements to Q&A this month. I'm now going to move on to my next favorite feature, which is the Azure map. So kind of nice that we were talking about maps just before the session got started. This drops this month, so this is awesome. I'm just going to set it up. So we've already dropped latitude and latitude. I'm also going to drop my longitude in, which should zoom me in, hopefully to somewhere in Whistler. There we go. So this is the bubble layer. You can see that all of my data points are represented with nice little bubbles. This was a route that I ran a few years ago now. Just like with other types of visuals, I can drop in like a legend, so I can see where I was at different hours. I was here, sort of at 7 o'clock, then 8 o'clock, I was doing this part, and then 9 o'clock in the morning. By default, it shows as bubbles, but we can also change that to a 3D layer, which is a bar chart. So anyone who's used maps in Excel 2016 or higher, I don't remember the exact name of those maps. I think they were called 3D maps in Excel. Okay.
Are you thinking Power Map?
Power Map, that's the one.
Yeah,
it has to be Power something, right?
I believe they got renamed to 3D maps. I think you're correct on that. Sorry, I was just confused because I was thinking there's a couple of other different map charts, but this, more Power Map-ish kind of thing.
Power Maps 3. I think you're right. They were renamed to 3D maps. So if I toggle off bubbles, you can have both toggled on at the same time. I like toggling just one at a time. And if we really zoom in here, we can start seeing, let's use the buttons. And with any map, it's taking a little bit of time to load. These are all going to be flat because I have nothing in size. But if I drop altitude onto size, hopefully this will zoom me right back in. There we go. Wonderful map experience. There we go. Okay. And now we have 3-dimensional columns where we once had bubbles. All of this altitude is going to be quite similar. Oh boy. Oh, I'm overeager again. I jumped the gun on the birthday of Power BI, and now I'm zooming. There we go. Okay, that's pretty stable now. So now we have 3D columns. Using some of the buttons here, I can change the pitch of the map. I can also change the default rotation as well. So there's a few different options that we can do for the map themselves. But I think what is really powerful with this visual is some of the formatting options and some of the different layer functionality that we can do. So we have some general layer settings in here where we can sort of say what's the maximum minimum data value, what's the transparency, etc. Right in the visual itself, we can set what the base layer looks like. So we can have sort of like a street view that you'd see like on Bing Maps or powered by TomTom. We can have all different types of background for our data points, just depending on the view, I guess, that we want in our Power BI report. We also have the ability to add in sort of custom reference layer files. So if you had like a GeoJSON file, we could totally add that in here and have another layer besides the data that's already in our data model. We can also add traffic layer and a tile layer as well. So I've not really had the chance to play around with those as well, but I've seen some blog posts where some people have already jumped in and it looks really powerful. So I'm excited to get in and start trying some of those things out. The third feature that I really liked this month was looking at, I think 49 new DAX measures have been introduced, and they're all existing Excel functions, and they're sort of the suite of financial functions from Excel. So if I go back in here, this is the list of all the functions that were added for DAX. So we have here we go. Future value is one that I've used quite a bit in Excel. If anyone sort of works with their treasury, finance, or accounting department, and you use Excel formulas, you'll be familiar with at least some of these. But the one that I've built my example around is this yield formula. So it returns the yield on a security that pays interest sort of on a periodic basis. And if I zoom into here, all the documentation is really good. It needs 6 arguments, and 7 is optional. And it goes on, again, tons of great documentation. It gives an example down here that I recreated. So I took this exact example set of data, brought it into my data model. I used the new yield function, and to 14 decimal places, I got the same answer. So I was happy with that. And I know that I've looked at doing some financial statement reporting within Power BI. Having these DAX formulas is going to make that a lot easier to deal with. So I'm really happy that they brought all 49 in at the same time. And if you're familiar with them in Excel, they're pretty much exactly the same in DAX. So I think that was awesome. The fourth feature I'm going to cover is one that any big Power Query user I know is probably going to be really happy with. If I go into options in my Power BI in the desktop, and under global options in data load, we now have the global option to never detect column types and headers for unstructured sources. Previously, this had been available sort of in the local file in the data load here. We could just toggle this on and off, but now it's a global option. So if we never want to automatically detect the column types, the data types columns coming in, we can toggle that off. And I think that had been posted as in the community since 2017 or 2018. So it quite a lot of votes behind it. It was quite popular, and it's awesome now that this is an option. Particularly again for those who are using Power Query quite consistently. The last feature that I want to bring attention to is the public preview of external tools in Power BI Desktop. So what this means is that, let me click off of here. If you have like DAX Studio or Tabular Editor, different applications installed on your computer, you will have an extra tab here on the ribbon that will say external tools. So right now, I believe 3 are supported: the AML Toolkit, the DAX Studio, and the Tabular Editor. And so right from within Power BI, you can launch these applications and start using some of that functionality. So it's really combining a lot of this BI suite together. And so I think that's really, really cool. And again, it's just making it a lot easier when you're in your BI development cycle. Power BI can really be your one-stop place, and you can launch and spin off to different places from there. So with that, those are the 5 features that were my favorite from this month. Not had a chance to dig into all of them as much as I would have liked to, but I know that's going to come sort of in the next few days or weeks. Again, this is all my details up here. If you want to connect on Twitter, connect on LinkedIn, more than happy to talk again about anything discussed today or anything Power BI or Excel or anywhere in between. And now I'm happy to pass it back over to Luca. I'm looking forward to his presentation today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to you, mate.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you very much. And I'm like glad I haven't like checked the update for the July version, because this third-party integration is like super cool.
Yeah, awesome.
I do really like it. Okay, so a little bit of sound check. So can you hear me? Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can see it. You're good to go.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep.
So thank you very much for having me. So this is not the first time I'm presenting at Vancouver Power BI User Group and Modern Excel. And I feel like more excited this time doing this remotely than in person. I don't know why, but I'm a little bit anxious because I do usually love engaging with people in person. And tonight I'm going to talk about Power BI, continuous integration and continuous deployment with Azure DevOps. And the topic is like not for beginners. So I'll assume that most of the notions related to Power BI authoring and Power BI administration are familiar or kind of familiar to this community. And I'm going to ask you to follow the presentation from a perspective of a BI manager or BI operation team. And I know that nowadays everyone wants to be a citizen developer, but I'm asking the community to try to be a citizen administrator if possible. And I've decided to put together this presentation for a specific reason, because nowadays we need to deliver quick, we need to avoid mistakes, and we need to be agile. So I do believe that with continuous delivery of results, we can help a BI team to deliver artifacts to the end user and to our consumer in a kind of continuous flow, and hopefully without errors. And a little bit about myself. I'm a consultant in BI analytics. I own a company in Vancouver, which is mainly focused on corporate training. We are growing, and tonight I represent PBI Lab, and the company is also expanding to offer consulting in BI. And we recently got the silver partnership in data analytics, and we are a Power BI partner listed in the Microsoft website. We will start by delivering the dashboard in a day, analytics in a day training soon for the mainly Pacific West Coast and also US West Coast. And so about this evening, I have 1 hour time, and I hope I can fit everything. And I would like to mention that at the end of this slide deck, there's a link to my GitHub. So if I won't be able to present all the slides, you should be free to go download the slide deck, and maybe some of the concepts will make more sense later on. But what we're going to talk about today is a quick check of the new Power BI deployment pipeline preview that has been released by Microsoft in late May. So it's been more than 1 month now. And then I want to talk about a multi-tier developing process. As I do believe that most of us are like maybe with a background as a developer, so we know the importance of the application lifecycle management. I want to showcase a little bit with a demo what I implemented in my PBI Lab tenant to manage different environments, so 3 stages: dev, test, and UAT and production. And after that, I will approach the topic of continuous integration. So by using Visual Studio Enterprise 2019 and Azure DevOps Git, I'm setting up a repo, and then I try to showcase two pipelines using Azure DevOps, one for creating massively Power BI workspaces with proper user permission, and another one to manage a report deployment. So before doing that, I think that it might be useful to send in the team chat a quick survey, because it might be helpful for me later on to understand a little bit more about the expertise of the attendees tonight. And there are 6 basic questions, and one of them is like, do you have Power BI Premium in your organization? And the reason why I'm asking that, it is because the deployment pipeline released by Microsoft in late May 2020 is available only for premium tenant. So that means that if you want to leverage that functionality, you will need to be a member of organization with premium. Of course, you need to be a pro user. And one of the requirements is that you can actually create a pipeline using workspaces that are generated using the new workspace experience, which is not anymore new, but it's been released by Microsoft more or less, I think that right now 2 years ago, more or less. And so what are the functionalities? I'm going to run a demo, very quick one about that, but actually Microsoft creates this experience by dividing the deployment pipeline into different stages: dev, test, and production. And what you can do, you can actually do a selective deployment or a complete deployment of your artifacts from one workspace to another one, so from one stage to the higher stage. And by saying that, it's not true that you can deploy all the artifacts. Right now it supports report and dataset and app, and there are other cool functionalities. I think that they still need a little bit of improvement, but actually you can compare the different stages, so you can see which artifacts are in one stage and are not in another one. And then you can create something that I do believe is like extremely useful. You can create dataset rule. So let's suppose that, for example, you want to run your test in the test environment against a subset of your full dataset, because you care more about the, let me say, functional requirement than the overall data. You can actually, through parameters, and then by leveraging this functionality in the deployment pipeline, you can actually create a rule and having your data set in test working only with a subset of your data. And I'm going to show something similar. But first of all, I need to jump in my partner tenant. Why that? Because in my PBI Lab tenant, I don't have a premium subscription. So I have a premium subscription just because Microsoft is giving that to PBI Lab as a Power BI partner. So right now you can see that I'm logging Power BI using my partner login. And you can see immediately that over here on the left, there's a new deployment pipeline feature. So from another point of view, if you are not in a premium capacity, you will see that, for example, in my tenant for PBI Lab, in the left blade, that functionality doesn't exist. And switching back to the tenant where I have the premium capacity, what I would like to show you today is that by clicking this button, immediately I can access the deployment pipeline already created and shared to me. So for the purpose of the meeting tonight, I create a PBI Lab pipeline, and by jumping in, you see that I stood up 3 different workspaces: one workspace for development, one for test, and one for production. And right now, all my stages are perfectly in sync. You can see this green button over here. But for the purpose of tonight, I want to show you how to create a new one. So actually, by going back to the main menu for the pipeline, I can create a new one and give that a title, like, for example, Power BI UG Vancouver, and a description if I want. And if I click create, the first action that Microsoft asked me to do is assign a workspace. So now if I click the button over here, assign a workspace, you see that Microsoft is telling me that cannot find a workspace for me to assign to this pipeline. And why is that? It is because right now there are no workspaces that are premium, not yet assigned to another existing pipeline. So you can see that my 3 workspaces that test and production have been already assigned, so I cannot recycle them to work in another pipeline. And if I arrive at the point tonight where I can showcase how I created another pipeline using Azure DevOps and PowerShell, you will discover that basically over here there are still a little bit of limitation. But this is not bad, just saying that there are limitations. But let's do something like this. In the Power BI user group Vancouver Workspaces that I pre-created, I've also uploaded a bunch of reports and data set, of course. I'm going to assign this workspace to be premium. So I go in the workspace setting, I assign this to be in dedicated capacity, and I click save. So now at this point, I get this little diamond beside my workspace. If I go back in the deployment pipeline and I go in the Power BI user group Vancouver brand new created pipeline, I can right now select the Power BI user group Vancouver workspace. And he's asking me which kind of stage you want to assign this workspace to. And I'm going to pick the development because it's a brand new pipeline. I want a development environment. So as soon as I click assign, the number of artifacts in my workspace are popping up. And there are some cool features over here. I guess like these are cool integration because what I can do, I can actually publish an app for the workspace. So without the need of switching back and forth in the menu, right? And what I can do, I can also manage the setting, so the access, the permission of the workspace, and also the workspace setting. And what is cool is that actually I can deploy all of them or one single artifact. And if I have, for example, if I click this data set, I can also hit the if I click this report, says analysis, I can also hit the select related button. Is going to tell me based on the lineage, the data set that are linked to my report. Now, for the purpose of this demo, and because I had the need to show you a little bit about the data set rules I was mentioning before, I created a report which is called, let's try to deploy the sales agent performance report. So this report says agent performance. I'm going to jump in my Power BI desktop, take advantages of parameters. So if I look at my parameter list, I actually created a parameter for two parameters for the connection string because I want to connect a SQL Server, a SQL Server database, and I have a parameterization of the year in my dimension date. And why I'm showing you that? Because behind the scene, for the purpose of this demo, I created 3 different SQL Server in my local machine. So one is for dev, one is for test, and one is for prod. And I'm gonna use that for this demo. So based on this, what I'm gonna do right now is deploying just these 2 artifacts. And I hit the button deploy to test. Now, the first question I had at the beginning when I was testing, well, what is gonna deploy that? Because I didn't assign a test workspace. And you can see that immediately is standing up a workspace itself. So is Microsoft standing up a workspace which is called Power BI User Group Vancouver with the bracket test. Of course, I can rename it if I'm not happy with the name, but I think that it's a very good name. And what I can do right now, I can jump to the workspace if I want. But the first stuff I want to show you is this: is that by clicking this deployment setting arrow, I can actually set up rules for the data set inside the workspace. So let's pick the only data set that has been deployed 1 second ago. And you see that I can add 2 different type of rules. A rule for a data source, and I'm out of context for tonight, sorry for that, and a parameters rule for the data set. I'm going to use the parameters rule. So let's add one of that. You can see that he asked me to choose for a specific parameter. I'm going to pick the SQL Server name. So it's copy and pasting from, actually is reading the value, because when I deploy from dev to test, actually the parameters were moved at the exact same value they were in dev, right? So now I'm in test. What I want to do, I want to switch my SQL Server database name from dev to test. And what I want to do, I don't want to test it for the whole time for the whole time frame. I want just to test, for example, from 2018 to 2018, just for a single year. Then I hit save, and this is going to save the rule for me. So what's going to happen is that right now, when I'm triggering a refresh, actually, when I'm triggering another deployment from dev to test, let me just double check if it was saved. Okay. When I'm triggering another deployment, it's going to switch automatically the parameters. So if from here, I switch to the workspace, and I'm going to check the dataset parameters right now, you're going to see that it's still working with the original one. But if I go back to the deployment pipeline and decide to override this guy, what's going to happen is that actually is now will be working with the data with the parameters rules for the dataset that I defined 1 second ago. So if I go to the workspace and I check the dataset right now, you're going to see that these are switched to 2018, and it's actually right now working in test. So really quick, because I don't have like much time to cover this, I can actually then deploy to production. What I can do after I deploy to production, I can create another rule, but I can also revert the deployment back. Actually, for that, there's a limitation, because if I try to say, well, bring, sorry, what is it? I'm losing the, so I could potentially deploy to the previous stage from production to test. There might be the need sometimes to go back to do another UAT from a version which is in production, or maybe I have like 2 deployments coming at the same time, but I'm not happy with the production version. So there are different stuff that you can do, but I cannot deploy to the previous stage, actually, because these artifacts already exist in test. So what I will need to do is going inside the test workspace, which is here, delete my artifacts. Where is the delete button? Here. And now at this point, I guess that I will need to refresh this deployment pipeline page. So now it's telling me that there are no artifacts back in test, and I can deploy to the previous stage. And I feel like this is like pretty cool. Actually, it's working with most of the common data sources, not all of them, but actually SQL Server, Azure SQL Analysis Service, Azure Analysis Service. And I don't know if it's working also with SharePoint. I haven't tested that yet. I think that is working also with files. And this is the end of this very short demo, but I felt like maybe it's still quite new capabilities and was like worth the time showing that. Now let me switch back to the presentation, and I'm going to talk about application lifecycle management. So this is a topic that I do really care a lot about. And what I'm talking about is that some of you might know the acronym DTAP, Development, Testing, Acceptance, and Production. So it's a multi-tier developing process. It's like very common in IT. Not everyone is using all the stages, and actually there are even some approaches with 2 more stages, like education, or there might be 5 or 6, right? But for the purpose of tonight, I'm approaching this demo by grouping together testing and acceptance in a single environment, which is called test UAT. So I'm going to work with dev, test, and prod. And how do we achieve that in Power BI, considering that Power BI is mostly common as a self-service data analytics tooling, right? And I already talked about that, so let me just reach to the next slide. I was mentioning that there are potentially other 2 stages like education and backup. So for simplicity, tonight we are going to talk about dev, test, and production. But why it is important to me having different environments? Because every environment has a different purpose. And the more you move to the top of the pyramid, right, the more you're looking to stability and performance. But when you're down, and you're in a dev environment, you want to give flexibility and adaptability to your power user, because you want them to be able to collaborate quickly, to review quickly, to bring value immediately. So this is the main purpose of the environment from my standpoint of view, right? But then what I will also like to underline is that the function based on the also usability, but also how much time an operation team should spend between the different environments. I do believe that we should spend less time moving stuff to prod, because when we are ready to go to prod, it means that we already review our artifact, our Power BI report, and actually we might be ready to go and show and present and serve this report to our final consumer. So this slide is just kind of a different point of view of the previous one. And So moving forward, for us, what is development? Actually, in Power BI, development is Power BI desktop, correct? Because I mean, time ago, they start pushing a lot of functionality directly in Power BI service, right? But if I want to get the most out of Power BI from an authoring point of view, I will need to work with the desktop tool. And for me, the DEV Workspace is actually to be granted to power users, citizen developers, subject matter experts that want to give value through the creation of insight. And I do think of them like contributors. So they are contributing to the growth of a report and dashboard for my organization. But what I want also to enable them be them able to do, I want them to be able to review their work in an environment which is still development, right? But is not yet ready to be tested as a production environment. So what I'm trying to explain over here is that it is true that our dev environment is my desktop, but I cannot share my file with potential reviewer using the desktop itself. Okay, well, I can send the PBIX file through email or share it in SharePoint, download and open again, but that doesn't make sense. Right? We have the service for that. So what we need to do is create a development environment in the service. And in that specific workspace, I'm going to grant permission not only to the contributor, so my power user, the report creator, but also to the reviewer, so those that are validating the work in an agile way. And I'm going to call these guys reviewers. And these reviewers have only viewer role, so they cannot actually delete the artifacts that a contributor is publishing, and they cannot edit them. And my second environment, which is the test acceptance, is, for simplicity, I'm going to call it test, right? I think that test is basically for testing functionality and checking that my data are accurate, right? That my source of truth is accurate, that the report is giving the perfect insight. Most of the time in my test and acceptance environment, I'm already using kind of production data, right, to validate my data. So when I switch from a dev data source to a test data source, sometimes I have in my test data source a restore or a restore of a backup which is coming from production 1 week ago, because I want to validate that the data are accurate. And in this environment, I'm distributing the artifact not anymore using a workspace. I'm distributing the artifact using an app. And of course, behind my app, there's another workspace, but I'm not granting permission to write, contribute, or read in such workspace. I'm just distributing to my reviewers in the test application. And for the purpose of validating the data and validating the functionality, because my app and that a report is moved from dev to test, and something is not working. So my developer, they will need still to have access to test, right? So I'm granting viewing permission to my test app, both to my contributor, power user, and my reviewers. And the final stage is production. So production as test is another app for further distribution, where I have the broader audience, so all my consumers in my organization, or maybe by role, of course, I can set up some role of that, but I'm distributing my report in production using an app. And then at this point in the app, all my consumers have a viewer role together with my power user, because still one of my final customers might need to review with the power user what has been doing during the development. So that said, I'm going to skip this slide, but the only topic I want to talk about is that the automation comes into play between the different environments. So if I'm setting up something like that, I want to be agile, moving the report and the dashboard between the different environments. So in order to do that, I'm creating an automation using Azure DevOps. And what's happening is that in every single workspace, no matter which environment, my Power BI admin team, so the operation team, needs to have Power BI admin permission. Why that? Because I want them to be able to manage the deployment, even if, sorry, not the deployment, but to manage the properties and the permission. But the deployment is going to be run by an automation. And I will jump to that demo pretty quick. So let me just move a little bit ahead. So I let you look at the slide, but actually there are different roles as I explained before. So the consumer will have permission. So the consumer will access basically the production and in the production application. My reviewer, they have permission in dev just to review, and in test again for review. My power user, they will use the desktop to author, then they will publish in the DEV Workspace, and then the power user will have viewing permission everywhere down in all the stages. And my admin guys, actually they will administer everything because they need, there's a mistake in these slides because the admin guys, they will need to be admin, of course, also in that. I don't know where I left this oval, but I will correct the slide later on. Sorry for that. And that said, I want to jump at the demo because the demo is going to display way faster than this slide what I'm talking about. And I will just recap this bunch of slides explaining a little bit about the difference between Workspace and app, and why it is important to me to distribute through an app, and how we can customize the app to be user-friendly. And that said, in order to showcase this demo, I need to talk a little bit about what I hope PBI Lab will be in 2 months' time. No, I'm kidding. Maybe in 10 years' time, if I'm still here. But I would like to have an organization with an headquarter and a couple of business units, maybe one in the western region, one in the eastern region, and different sites. For example, Vancouver, Seattle, Calgary, Toronto, and New York. So what I'm gonna show you in my PBI Lab Power BI tenant is how I stood up this set of workspaces. And let me jump at the demo. So I'm gonna open the PBI Lab tenant in Power BI. And if I hit the workspace button, you see that I group under the same icon all the workspaces that I create for this specific demo. Maybe it is better to filter them by region. And you can see that I have a tripod. I have a tripod by business unit side. So for example, in the Eastern region, I have the office New York. So I'm creating for my New York office 3 environment, dev, test, and production. Same story for Toronto, same story for Calgary, Seattle, and Vancouver. And then I have a kind of anomaly, which is called PBI Lab region public. Why that? Because sometimes I might need to share a report to all my consumers and not only to the consumer of a specific office. So let's suppose that, for example, this report is giving value to the whole organization, not only to New York office. I have the need to promote their report in a production environment available to everyone. Now, from a security standpoint, it's kind of articulated, but it's actually pretty basic. So let me show you the dev environment for Vancouver, for example. If I go in the access, you see that I created different roles. And I have the standard Microsoft roles for the workspace, contributor, admin, viewer, and over here, I think that member, I don't need member in this specific use case, but there will be also a member role. But I have different groups, and those groups have been set up in my Azure Active Directory. So I have a group that is capable to contribute to this workspace, which is my Vancouver Power BI user group. And then I have a group which is capable to view in order to review what the power users are doing, which is the group of my reviewers. And then I have my admin, a very strange guy, which is called service principal, and you're going to understand more about the service principal for the automation of the deployment in a little bit. So now this is that. Let's have a look at what tests look like. So if I jump into the workspace and I filter back region and I go in my Vancouver test and I go in the access, you're going to see that this time there's no one. So there are no contributors and there are no viewers, there are just the admin. Why that? Because this workspace actually is distributed through an application. And how I achieved that, so let me go in the workspace itself. When I created the app for my final user, and in the app itself, I granted the proper permission for the Active Directory user group that I wanted to grant this app to. And in my case, since this is test, I'm still not happy to allow permission to the consumer, but I'm allowing permission to the power user and the reviewer. Different story if I go in the production workspace for Vancouver. So let's click on top of this. In the permission, I'm still granting just the admin. But in the application, at this point in time, I'm granting permission to my consumer. And what's cool about this approach is that by flagging the checkbox install this app automatically, I can actually deploy this application for my consumer without the need of sharing a link or whatsoever. They will need just to log in their Power BI, and the app will actually pop up in the app section over here. And what I do believe is also cool is that in the app I can create something. So now let's just filter the app by region again. So now I'm an admin right now, so I can see all the application. I color the application in two different ways, light blue for test and blue for production. But if I, for example, check the Vancouver application for production, I also created a kind of, I do believe, very cool welcome page where I'm just moving everyone to the proper link, Microsoft link, to get the Power BI version, to my SharePoint site if they have a need to look for documentation, and a little bit of training, and maybe a GitHub version, something like that. And the cool stuff about this is that I had just to set up my Azure Active Directory in a proper way. So if I am to show you the Azure Active Directory right now, you're going to see that. So let's go the step back. So Azure Active Directory, I go inside my group, and you can see that I stood up. So I call them this way as a prefix, so I can actually group them in a better way. But you can see that I have a specific group for, where is Vancouver? Sorry, it doesn't fit. There are so many. So for Vancouver, I created a group for the power user, for the consumer, and for the reviewer. And if I go inside the power user group, you can see that I granted inside this power user group a specific user, which is called Vancouver Power User, Power BI Power User. What a fantasy, but I had to keep this consistent for being able to show this easily during the demo. And what is important is that I was mentioning before that I also created another app, and I called that workspace. And so I created another workspace and another app for the public. Public means accessible by everyone, and I called that workspace PBI Lab region public. So in my app, that is called under the same name. And if I go in the, what is it? In the public app, and let's go back in the workspace. Sorry for this little delay. So if I go in the public workspace, if I check the permission of the app, this app is granted to a group which is called all Power BI Power User and all Power BI Consumer. Why that? Because in my Active Directory, I create a group for all the consumer where my member are all the other consumer groups. So in that way, I can keep the organization and the role-based security consistent. So that said, the demo is pretty basic. So if I jump to an incognito window of my Chrome and I open Power BI, now I want also to switch to another demo file. So if I go and sign in, you're not supposed to see that here. So now I want to log in as a Vancouver power user, and now of course it would be better to be protected by multi-factor authentication, but let's say that we have the proper security in place, right? So now as a consumer for the Vancouver group, when I hit the workspace button, I can see only that. But when I go in the app, I can actually see the test. Sorry, I can actually see I'm a power user. Yeah, I'm a power user now. Yeah, I'm a power user. Okay, so I can see the workspace for that because I will need to contribute and publish, and then I can see the other two workspaces for test and production and the public region. Now, if I log out from this guy, and I open another session and I log in this time as a consumer. So the final user. Let me just put in the password. What's the main difference is that if I open the workspace, there are no workspace available to me. But if I open the app, I can actually see the public app and my Vancouver production app. So I'm a consumer, I'm seeing only production. And so this will be the end of the demo. Actually, what I could show you is that if I add a user to another group, then actually that user is getting automatically permission to see additional workspaces. But I think that you got the point about that, and I will need to actually jump to the other section because it's like pretty demanding. I don't know if there are questions because I'm not checking the. Okay, I see there are no questions, so I take that as a win for now. And going back to my slide deck, how I can control this and how I can create automation based on a security model as I showed you before, and based on the fact that I'm having 3 different environment, dev, test, and prod. So I'm trying to show you an approach that you can take away, but it's actually fully customizable. You can customize it, right? So it's not that you will need to do something like that. But I'm creating a version control using Azure Repo. So what is the repo actually? You know, like GitHub, for example, I have a set of version control tools that I can use to manage my code. And inside my repo in Azure DevOps, I can also apply policies. So for example, I can say that I have a repository for my Power BI report structured by folder, and there are different branches. For example, I have a master branch where I'm pushing all the production ready deployment that is not accessible by anyone actually beside the BI operation team. Why that? Because sometimes, most of the time when I push a report, if it's not in direct query, I'm also pushing the dataset, and the dataset might contain also sensitive data. So implementing policies and permission in Azure DevOps repo is extremely important. And now the example is like this. Then I will show you the demo. So actually, I created an Azure repo which is called Power BI Operating Framework, and every business unit side of the structure that I showed you before is actually existing also in my repo, plus a couple of additional folders where I can, for example, leverage PowerShell code or certificate that are needed to run the automation. And based on this, I'm going to show you the demo about the repo very quick, because there's not like something like really cool or really complicated implemented here. But let me just refresh this Google Chrome tab. So you can see that I have the Power BI Operating Framework repo in Azure DevOps. Now, this repo, you can see that right now let me go in the branch over here. I have a master branch. So now I'm displaying my master branch. I have 2 branches that I would like to keep just because over there I have some certificate that I will need to backup later. And what about the permission and policies on top of this repository? If I go in the project setting inside Azure DevOps, I can actually go in the repo, and for my specific repo Power BI Operating Framework, I can, for example, set up policy like saying, okay, for the branch master, I do require at least 1 reviewer which is approving my my pull request. So for example, if I trigger a deployment and deploy something to production, I might always need a reviewer to approve my change, or maybe 2. And there are a bunch of other customization that you will need to do. But actually, the important stuff is that you will need to apply policy and also permission. And for example, in my policy, I'm assigning myself as an automatic reviewer included in the deployment, because I will need to show you that approval is required. And it's just me, so I'm going to approve myself. Sorry for that. But there are other important stuff like the permission. So in the repo, you might also need to set up permission. So for example, you will need to configure for you maybe you need to configure a specific group of users, which is the one in charge of administering this repo. So in my case, I created a Power BI operating framework group, and in this group is again just me. So for the purpose of the next demo, which is like really demanding from a time perspective, and I have only 20 minutes left, what I'm gonna try to do is show you how can I create through the usage of a Azure DevOps pipeline by leveraging the repository that I showed you a few seconds ago and the security structure that I showed you in the previous demo. How can I leverage a massive workspace creation, for example? And in order to do that, and in general, in Azure, every time I want to create a local representation of a user which is running an application, I need a specific guy which is called service principal. So now this guy in Azure is known as a app. So I will need to register an app in Azure. But why that is needed? It is because I'm granting the app which is running my automation permission to read and or write, depends on what I need the app to do, stuff in my Power BI workspaces. And in order to do that, there are a couple of steps required. And I'm asking you to check my GitHub because there's also a PowerShell script that is like really easy to run, and you can create automatically a service principal with some permission. And actually, I'm leaving you the step of assigning the permission in Azure, but I will show you this in my Azure, so maybe you have a better understanding. So first step, I need to create a service principal, so an application. Then at that application, I assign the right API permission. Once that is done, I create an Azure Active Directory group with my application as a member. And then I go in the Power BI service admin setting, and I grant this Azure Active Directory group permission to, so I'm allowing a service principal the capability to run Power BI API. So these steps are extremely important, otherwise the full deployment is not gonna work. And then after that, I'm actually running a pipeline. I'm gonna show you very quickly the PowerShell script I created for that. The script is like open source, so actually get it, try it, and if you like it, use it. But actually this pipeline is gonna create multiple workspaces with multiple group security for the workspace. And the workflow seems like really challenging, but what I'm doing is that I'm connecting through my Visual Studio, the Azure repo. I'm creating a new branch out of my master branch. I'm uploading a very simple template where I define the name of the workspaces and the security for the users, for the groups inside the workspaces. Then I push this branch to the remote. So I push this to my Azure DevOps repo. I also merge to master if I want, but usually I do prefer running this before merging to master because I don't know if the workspace creation is going to be successful. Then I create my pipeline, and the workspace are going to be created in Power BI. So in order to do that, I'm using a template, which is an Excel file where I have just 3 columns: workspace name, AD group name, and the role I want to assign. Then inside the Azure repo, I created a specific section called Workspace Creation Configuration, where I'm going to upload my template, and then I'm triggering the pipeline. So now, if you think about corporate environment, maybe there is a need of create, 10 brand new workspaces. Maybe that's coming using a ticket. What you can do actually with this is version control. You can actually create the branch linked to a ticket number. You can do multiple governance activities that might be really useful. And then as said, I'm just going to execute the pipeline. So since this is part of the demo, I'm just going to jump to the demo right now. So what's going to happen during the demo? PBI Lab is super successful. So we are going to expand. I need to create new workspaces for 2 new offices, Victoria and Montreal. So one in the West and one in the Eastern region. And as said, I want that test and prod. So I'm going to create 6 new workspaces in total. And so let's jump to my Chrome. First of all, 2 seconds about the app registration. So if I go in the app registration in Azure, you're going to see that for the purpose of today's demo, I created a Power BI as service principal PBI Lab. To this specific application service principal, actually, I secure the application by using a self-signed certificate, which is going to expire in March 2021. I have a secret for that. Actually, this is for the matter of security. These values are stored safely in the deployment pipeline. I will show you that later. But what's important over here is that in the API permission, I granted permission. Oh, this shouldn't be here. Okay, later on. I granted permission to read my Azure Active Directory and to read and write in my Power BI workspace. So the gateway read all is just because I was testing something before and I forgot to remove it. And so I'm having just the Azure Active Directory, read all, Power BI service, workspace, read all, and read and write. And why I do need not only Power BI, but also Azure Active Directory, because I want to add Azure Active Directory group as group with permission to my workspaces. Then as a next step, explain what is a service principal. What I'm going to do is actually open my Visual Studio. So in my Visual Studio, okay, it's a blank canvas. You're going to see that I'm connected to my Azure DevOps over here in the top. So I'm connected to the Power BI operating framework repo. And I have different branches, and right now I'm connected to master. So in my Solution Explorer, I'm seeing the master structure as the one I'm seeing inside my repo over here, right? So it is actually the same. And that structure belongs to a local repo too. So in my machine, I have the same structure. What I'm going to do right now is trigger a deployment for workspace creation. So what I want to do is that I receive a ticket, for example, so I need to work to that ticket to create 6 new offices. I create a new local branch out of master, and I call this PBI UG demo and ticket number 11223344, something like that. I create this new branch. Now, Visual Studio is switching to the branch. The branch, you see that there's not a little green arrow as the other one, so it's not yet in sync with my remote Azure DevOps repo, but I can still explore my solution. So in the workspace creation configuration section, I will need to add a template with the rules for the workspace and the group to be created. So what I'm going to do, I pre-created a workspace Excel file for that. So I'm going to open for you the Excel file. Just a second. Okay, over here I'm telling, actually I'm creating just a basic CSV file, and my workspace name, my workspace group, and the role I want to assign to that group inside the workspace. So now I have a Montreal Dev, Montreal Test, Montreal Production, so this group, Victoria Dev, Victoria Test, Victoria Production, this other group. And I'm granting my Montreal Power User Group, which already I have pre-created in Azure, of course, contributor role, and I'm creating my Azure Admin Operation Team Administrator role in all the workspaces. So that said, what I'm going to do, actually, I pre-prepared this over here. So I copy this guy, and in my other local structure inside the workspace creation configuration, I'm going to upload this file. So what's happening in Visual Studio, you can see that I have a tiny plus arrow over here, which is telling me, oh, this is a brand new file. Okay, yes, I want to work with this template. What I'm going to do right now, I'm going back in the Team Explorer, I'm checking which kind of changes do I have in my project. So actually it's telling me, okay, there's a brand new template, okay. And I'm going to call my, so what I need to do is giving this commit, because I want to save this, a name. It's like new offices for Montreal and what's that, Victoria. And I commit this guy. So now at this point, it's telling me, okay, do you want to sync this with your remote branch? And I say yes. So what's happening is telling me that I'm ready to push this. Luca Gualtieri is ready to push this as an outgoing comment. I click push, and by clicking push, now is working to push my branch to the remote Azure DevOps repo. So if I go back in the repo, you're gonna see that. Let me just refresh the page. There's not anymore just the master and the two branches that I showed you before, but there's also a branch with the Power BI user group demo. So this is giving me a kind of version control. If I open the workspace creation configuration, you can see that there's a just now brand new template file. So now, since I know that it's going to be successful, I'm also pushing this to my master branch. So I'm creating a pull request. I know that's successful just because I tested it. Sorry for that. But if there's time for another demo for the repo deployment, I will show you how to go first in test and then in prod. Right now, we're just going in prod. What I'm gonna do is that, okay, I'm happy with this naming. I can add optional reviewer, require reviewer. I can link this to a specific work item in Azure DevOps board if I have one, but I don't have it. So I'm just hitting the create button. And at this point in time is creating the pull request. So now the pull request is not yet approved because you remember that in the policies, I show you that at least one reviewer is required. So now Luca Gualtieri is automatically there because I have that rule. I'm going to approve the pull request and complete it. So what's happening now is that it's merging this branch to my master branch. And I have the option to also delete this branch. I'm going to delete it because I want to keep my branch clean and I don't need that later on. So I'm completing the merge. And at this point in time, if I refresh my Azure DevOps repo, this branch doesn't exist anymore. You see that it's telling me that there's nothing more. So I will need to go to master. And this template right now is in master, and I pushed that 2 minutes ago. So now I want to leverage that. So what is going to happen in Power BI? If I go in the workspace, you see that there are no regions right now for Montreal and Victoria. So how do I trigger this deployment automatically is by running a pipeline. And I created a pipeline in Azure DevOps, and I created two. The second one is the coolest one, but if you're giving me another 10 minutes, we are getting there. So how to create the workspace? Let me just jump into this pipeline. So in this pipeline, if I go in the edit button, there's just pour PowerShell. And the code is in the GitHub, but if we check the code over here, sorry, no, I open PowerShell just to check the code. But what is doing this pipeline is actually reading the secret that I store in a sensitive way inside Azure DevOps, then is connecting Power BI service using a service principal with the secret that are stored. And what it's doing is reading the input file, which is my workspace detail file I uploaded in the repo. So actually it's reading the repo. And for each, and then it's starting some loops, right? So for each workspace, if the workspace doesn't exist, gonna create a workspace. Otherwise, if it exists, jump to the next step and assign permission to that workspace. In order to do that, I'm using just the Power BI admin CMDLET for PowerShell. And just for the security, I'm invoking a Power BI REST method. But there are some links in the references at the end of the slide to dig more into this API. And so let's jump back to the pipeline. In my pipeline, as I told you before, there are some variables. Some of them are secretly stored. So I need the certificate, thumbprint, the password, the service principal ID that are the application I created in Azure before. And then I will need just to tell the pipeline, okay, where is the input file? And this checkbox here is going to tell me that this is the only stuff that the pipeline is asking me to provide when I want to run it. So I just need to tell the pipeline where my input file is. Since I'm putting all my input file inside this workspace creation folder in the remote repo, I'm just giving as a preset the folder name over there. And what I'm going to do right now is jumping back to the pipeline. I just hit the run pipeline button. is asking me, okay, which Azure repo you want to read? I want to read master because I push already the template in master, and I want to define just a variable. And the variable is actually the name of my CSV file. So let me grab that. You remember that it was PBI Lab Workspace Security Montreal Victoria, and I click update. And once that's done, I run the pipeline. So I added a little bit of verbose coding, so we can see. So what's happening behind Azure DevOps is that it's standing up an agent, right? So this agent is also installing the Power BI PowerShell module that I need to run the pipeline. So it might seem a little bit slow. Well, actually, it is slow, but I don't have reserved computing, so I'm just using DevOps for free in PBI Lab. So it's running. It's been running for already 19 seconds. So let's just jump inside the agent. So you see that it's doing stuff. So what it's doing is that actually at the beginning over here, he connected using the service principal. And now this is the verbose login because I'm asking him to install the PowerShell module to run all the operation to, get the workspace name, write the workspace, create the workspace in Power BI. So I need to write inside Power BI, so I need some specific PowerShell module. So still running, so still installing the stuff. Actually, why this needs to install the module every time? Because every time is spinning up a kind of new virtual machine. So the PowerShell module needs to be installed every time I run in the pipeline. And let's let this go. So now, okay, is at the next step. So now the login is being granted for the service principal and is reading the first line, I guess so. So it was like Montreal Dev. So the workspace doesn't exist, so there's no error message. But the second line, the workspace is existing, so it's giving me a warning. But in the behind, it's also assigning the permission, right? So the first time is creating the workspace, no message. Second time, the workspace exists because I'm adding the admin after the contributor. So what's happening right now is that it's like standing up these workspaces in my Power BI. It's almost there because it's already at the Victoria Dev, Victoria test. So there should be only Victoria prod missing. Okay, so this is the name of my Victoria prod workspace. And okay, and now this is done. So what I can also do, I can check in my pipeline the pass rate, everything, and then also I think that I do that up to receive an email. So I should receive an email that the build of my pipeline was successful. Not yet. Okay, I don't know why. Maybe it's coming. But actually, it completed successfully. So I have this green circle. And if I go back in Power BI and I refresh my window and I go in the workspaces, oh, not yet. Okay, here we are. So he created for me 6 additional workspaces, 3 for Montreal and 3 from Vancouver. And I recognize them because they don't have the icon assigned. And actually, if I go in the access for the Montreal Dev, you see that there are the roles I asked to deploy. So now, I have a question for you, because there's something cool that I will need to show just for 5 minutes, maybe without running the pipeline, but just to give an idea how you can do a deployment.
All right. So are you looking for 5 minutes then?
If you give me until the 7:25, 6 minutes.
Sure, go for it.
So we've seen how to run the pipeline to create the workspace. Now, what is really the scope of this demo is like, how do I do a report deployment? And for the scope of this demo, I install a plugin, an Azure Azure DevOps Marketplace plugin called Power BI Action, developed by Mike van der Gaag. Actually, is open source, so you can grab all the code that is using in the plugin and extract the code and create your own library. But what I'm doing with this plugin, after having installed that in my Azure DevOps, actually I'm creating rules to deploy report from one stage dev to another stage test, and then eventually to my production environment. The workflow is extremely complicated because over here, we need also to go through an approval. So actually, this is the workflow for dev. My developer is just going to use the desktop, and then he's going to upload the report all the way to my dev environment. But once he wants to promote the report to test, he's actually asking the BI team to do that. And he's asking that through a service ticket, for example, or official request. So at this point, the BI operation team is triggering the automation, of course, if the ticket is assigned to the BI team member, and is doing more or less the same I show you for the workspace creation, but with a different approach for the report deployment. And once the report is pushed to the workspace, it is just needed to click a button to upload that to the app, and at that point, it will be available for the reviewers in test. Then the report goes to official review UAT, and if it is approved, the deployment for the production workflow is triggered. So again, we run the deployment pipeline, but at this point in time, we are promoting to the product workspace, and we push from the product workspace to the app, and that's available for the consumer. So how to do that? I'm going to do this super quickly. Let me jump back in my Visual Studio, and I go back in my master branch. Now, my master is changed since the last time, and for that reason, what I'm going to do, I'm going to run just a sync to be sure that I do have then in my master locally the same. I'm in sync with the remote master because I committed a change, and then I did a pull request, and that pull request went in production, but someone else, some other developer might be working with master. So I will need to ensure that I'm getting always the most updated master. Once that is done, from master, I'm creating a new branch locally, and I call this deployment demo PBI UJ. So at this point, by creating a new branch, what I need to do is deploy a report. So someone told me that they will need to deploy a report, which is actually right now in the workspace. Oh, this is not the right user, so let me close this guy. Is in the workspace for Vancouver development. And I'm gonna show you this by deploying a report, which is called sales analysis. So my scope is deploying the sales analysis from dev to test. And I'm gonna show you that in the Western region of Vancouver test, actually the report sales analysis doesn't exist yet. So the first step I will need to do is how do I download the report from Power BI service with the less effort possible. So what I need to do is downloading the report in the specific region, Western region Vancouver, in my local repo. And in order to do that, in my repo, I've also created a PowerShell script, which is actually downloading the report automatically. So if you install the extension for PowerShell in Visual Studio, you can actually run the same script from here. But for the matter of this, and I have only 2 minutes left, I'm downloading the report from the service. So now, this is a full script available in GitHub. What it's doing is connecting with the service principal, asking you which workspace you want to connect, which report you want to download, and where you want to download that locally. So let's run this script. And in my demo file over here, okay, so it's not connecting as a service principal, sorry, it's connecting as an admin user because I'm a BI team member running this. So I'm connecting with my BI operation team member login, and that is asking me for the workspace. So what I'm gonna give to this guy is the workspace name, which is Western Region Van Dev. And then he's asked me, are you a tenant admin? Yes, I am. But if I'm not, it's going to download that anyway, but it's going to apply a different script. Give me the report name, so sales analysis. And where do you want to store it? Actually, I want to move that locally in my repo because this is the path of my repo, right? So if I hit this button and then I open the repo, what is it? So the file now is here, right? So it's been downloaded 1 second ago. So at this point in time that I have the file available over here, what I will need to do is just to trigger a pipeline that I created previously. So I go in the pipeline, the pipeline I created is called Power BI publish Power BI EX file to Workspace. Okay, there are still a lot of things to be explained, but please follow my slide. There are variables. This time I'm asking two stuff. Which one is the workspace I want to deploy to, and where I can find in the repo the file. I'm missing one step here, because now that the file is being downloaded locally in my local repo, and you see that I have a very small plus over here in the Western region, I need to push this in Azure DevOps, otherwise my pipeline is not gonna see that. So I go in my changes over here, and I just write deployment. Okay, no, it don't matter like that. You see that it's asking me to deploy this to the repo. I'm syncing that, and I'm pushing this. So the result of this is that the deployment demo PBI UG branch is created in my repo over here. Oh God, repo. So there's a new branch, deployment demo in the Western region, Vancouver. I have the sales analysis PBIX file. So I'm ready to trigger the pipeline. So let me go back in the pipeline over here. Publish to Workspace, run the pipeline, and which branch I want to work with. Okay, this branch, because I'm just going to test. I don't know if the report is going to go to prod, so I don't want to merge that to master yet. I need to define two variables. The first one is the PBI file path, and I pre-prepared this over here. So my file is in the Western region, Vancouver, and is under this name. And where do I want to update that? Upload that? Not anymore in dev, but I want to upload that in test. Then at this point, I click update. I close this guy, and I run the pipeline. And if I'm lucky, it's gonna deploy the report in dev. And then this will be the end of the presentation. I don't know. There's no time for question, and I'm already late. The two minutes from the extra bonus I got from Kent. So what it's doing right now is doing exactly the same step as before. So it's connecting using the service principal, but at this point in time is leveraging this Power BI action plugin that I installed. So it's been successful. So if I open the Power BI desktop and I try to refresh the Vancouver test, oh, what happened? You can see that now the sales analysis report is being deployed at 7:27 p.m. And same, when I get the approval, I can go in production, but at that point in time, I will merge to master to create a version control for my file. And that would be all. And please download the slide deck from the GitHub, so you can also have a look at the references in there. There are a bunch of very great articles for running this in a similar way.
Cool. And Luca, you'll give us a link to that GitHub so we can plug it into our the meetup site?
Yes. You want me to text to? Yeah, I'm going to send you right now. Let me just stop sharing my screen so you can share yours. And sorry for running late.
No worries. All right. And I am just going to try and figure out if I can mute everyone, because I'm getting some crazy feedback, and I'm hoping that it's not my mic. Okay, so hopefully that sounds a little bit better. I just want to go through and quickly round out the slides. Thank you very much, Luca, for doing the presentation there, and to Joseph, obviously, for doing our original What's New in Power BI. I do want to throw out a big thanks to the sponsors, because all this stuff, of course, is not possible without the sponsors here. Jana from Microsoft, that's hooking us up with Teams to get all this stuff sorted out, and she's doing the recordings. I'll then get those later on this week, and well, I guess the week's almost over, but we'll try and get them up to YouTube pretty quick, and then post in the meetup group. Obviously, Excel Guru hosts the meetup events here as well. We're organized and trying to keep this stuff together. PASS helps us out a little bit as well. And SkillWave is actually one of the joint projects I'm working on with Miguel Escobar and Matt Allington. And on that note, I just want to mention that We actually have phase 2 of our dimensional modeling for the Excel and BI Pro course is going to be released tomorrow. At that point, the price goes up from 189 US to 216 US. So if you're sitting on the fence and thinking about buying it right now, would actually be a really good idea. The price link or the link to the shop is right there, and there will still be more content released to this in August as well. I want to throw a shout out as well for PASS's virtual summit. This is going to be coming up November 10th to 13th. This is going to be delivered entirely online this year, and I know that PASS is really trying to get people to show up. This is the biggest event that they do in the year to actually raise funds for their organization, and they are trying very hard to make sure that they can actually survive the COVID era that we've all been part of. So if you're considering it, please go and use this code. You can actually get in there, get $50 off the registration, and you can find that through a quick Google search on PASS Virtual Summit. And finally, I just want to say that if you're interested in getting involved and you have a really cool topic that you want to present on modern Excel or Power BI, we would love to actually have you on here. You just need to send an email to rebecca@excelguru.ca, and we'll bash it back and forth and come up with a date and give you advice if you need it. And from there, we'll go ahead and get you on screen, because we'd love to share different perspectives from people around the world. On that note, I'm going to round this one off by saying thanks for coming. I really appreciate the continued support for the user group here. It's hard to believe that we're running, I think, almost 4 years now. And it's great to see that the turnout keeps on getting better for these things. So thanks very much. Stay tuned with the Meetup site. We will post the recording, and you can obviously share that with anybody else you're interested in doing so as well. And I see that Luca has actually posted the link to his GitHub here. I'm just going to copy that and make sure that we also have this available with the video when we publish as well. Thanks very much, folks. We'll see you next time.